Welcome to this week's episode of Democracy in Focus. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a fascinating topic that really highlights the intersection of law and politics in Ghana. We'll be discussing the 2012 presidential election dispute and the Supreme Court's unique role in resolving it.
Absolutely. The 2012 elections in Ghana were not just important nationally, but also had significant implications for how democracy might evolve in the region. If you remember, it was a narrow race, and allegations of irregularities shook the political landscape entirely.
Right. To set the stage, let's take listeners back to December 2nd, 2012. The atmosphere was electric as Ghanaians headed to the polls. However, soon after the results were announced, the opposition claimed millions of votes were affected by various irregularities. This led to a historic moment for the country, an unprecedented decision to file a presidential election petition before a 9-member Supreme Court panel.
And I think it's essential to highlight what judicialization of politics really means here. It refers to the growing trend of resolving political disputes, like election outcomes, through legal avenues, which were once settled through negotiation or even street protests. In Ghana's case, the Supreme Court became the focal point for political conflicts.
Exactly. This brings us to a key question. Did the Supreme Court merely adjudicate a legal dispute, or did it effectively judicialize Ghanaian politics by becoming an arena for partisan conflict? Imagine if a sports game was decided not by the players, but by an impartial judge. That's sort of what was at stake here.
That's a great analogy, and it feeds into how the case went on to become a national spectacle. For months, the hearings were broadcast live, granting citizens direct access to the judicial process. This not only informed the public, but also influenced conversations around legitimacy and fairness in elections.
Now, let's break down the Supreme Court's reasoning, shall we? The court ultimately upheld John Mahama's election victory by a narrow 5-4 decision. This razor-thin margin really opened the door for various interpretations of the laws and standards of proof used in the case.
Absolutely. And that narrow split means there was room for differing opinions, which, in turn, led to more debates among Ghanaians regarding the legitimacy of the court's ruling. The media played a crucial role in this, often framing the case primarily as a partisan contest instead of focusing on the legal nuances that were presented.
That's so true. And it underscores how critical the media's framing was. By amplifying political voices over legal analysis, they influenced the public's understanding of the court's reasoning. It's important to consider how this shaped societal perceptions of democracy in Ghana during that period.
Right. And shifting gears a bit, we should touch on what this all means for the future of democracy in Ghana and in other emerging democracies as well. The tensions created by this reliance on judiciary powers to resolve electoral disputes can risk delegating political choices to unelected judges. That could have serious implications down the road.
Yes, and there's a fine line here. In theory, courts can stabilize democracy by providing a rules-based resolution to electoral conflicts. But when heavy reliance on these legal battles becomes the norm, it can shift the balance of power away from the electorate and towards judges, complicating citizens' relationship with their political process.
So, to synthesize our conversation today, the 2012 Ghanaian presidential election dispute illustrates some critical issues within electoral violence, legal frameworks, and democratic engagement. It shows us that while legal resolutions can provide peace and legitimacy, they can also complicate citizen involvement and muddy the waters of political accountability.
Precisely. And I think one key takeaway from these discussions is the acknowledgement of the dangers and benefits of bandwagoning the judiciary into politics. It's a double-edged sword, and listeners should consider how these elements intertwine in their democracies too.
Exactly. Before we wrap up, let's remind our listeners that next week we will be focusing on media's role in political disputes in other countries. Be sure to tune in.
Thank you for joining us today on Democracy in Focus. We hope you learned something new about the intricate relationship between elections, the judiciary, and media. Until next time, end of episode.